Walk with me through the cellar door.
A storm is coming, Francis.
A portal to a more skeptical world.
Cellar Door Skeptics begins right now. Prepare for the revolution with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna.
Welcome to Cellar Door Skeptics. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We have a really amazing episode planned here tonight. Unfortunately, Hannah's not going to be able to join us because he's feeling under the weather and has to take care of his kids a little bit. So it's kind of one of those things where we gave him the night off, and it's going to be me and my good buddy slumming it tonight. So welcome to the show, buddy. How are you?
Slumdog Looney Air? No, that does not work.
That is?
Didn't quite work out as well as I had hoped. I am doing well. My cuts and scratches from taking my cats to the vet are healing up quite nicely, so we're great.
That's awesome, and it's funny because I was over at a friend's house this weekend, and he has cats, and I obviously don't have cats, so like for me it's a different experience to kind of have, because one of the cats is like ultra friendly and the other one is not. But the one that's not, for whatever reason, likes me. I have no idea why, but it likes to sit on me. Like every time I come over there, and it's like, oh, I gotta be careful because my wife's allergic to cats. Mm-hmm. So if I get too much pollen on me, like I have to strip naked when I get home and put the other clothes on, because I don't want her to. She doesn't get like sick, but the allergies really bother her. And she'll be stuffy for like the rest of the day and the next day and the next day. And sometimes it's like, it's just off for her. So I feel bad and I don't really want to give that to her. But it's kind of one of those, it's kind of one of those things where you'd say, hey, your cat clawed you. And that cat did not claw me, thank God. But I did get to spend, a day and a half with a couple cats. So I kind of felt like you a little bit, maybe.
Well, I got caught in the middle. The two young ones were playing around, and the one doesn't realize that even he's big for a cat. He's, like 14, 15 pounds, part Maine Coon, and he's just like, does not understand how much he weighs in comparison, especially to the other cats. And he tore off. And as he did, he ended up climbing up my arm. So I've got a couple of sizable gashes, and instead of just like the usual, like if you get something really sharp along your skin, you get that little cut. It's on like 2 or 3 days, whatever. These are like actual almost gashes that if they would get any worse, I probably would have had to go get them looked at.
Yeah, and that's good. I'm glad you did not have to have anything serious happen, because that would just be me by myself tonight, and that'd kind of be a little boring. So and I don't want you to get hurt. I guess there you go. I'll be the compassionate
priorities.
guy.
Yeah,
I want you to get hurt. In a second, we're gonna play the vaccine update I have from Dr. Abbie. Excuse me. But before we get to it, so if you're new and tuning into the show, welcome to Cellar Door Skeptics. We had a guest on last week that we've had on before, and it came to our attention about a day, maybe 2 days after the show, that he had sent a tweet that was I'm going to call it a very inappropriate tweet. And that's the nicest way to put it, because to me, it was pretty offensive in how he conveyed his message personally. I understand what he was trying to do, but anyway, so the guest that we had on, his name was Liam, and he tweeted a KKK hood at Candace Owens. Now, to be fair, Candace Owens was spouting nonsense racist crap. Like she was trying to defame black men. And so the incentive of him of actually trying to address it, like, is fine. I don't actually have any issues with that, but how he went about it was inappropriate. So we apologize, I guess, a little bit on his behalf for that. We don't know what's kind of happened to him. I do know a couple of days later he came out with a apology video, and he has since retired from politics, which is probably good for him at this current time. But it's just kind of sad because here we have a progressive that we were excited about, that wanted to get changes done, that agreed with us, that had a history degree, and he has a tweet that, you know, really did need to be addressed.
Yeah, it broke my heart because after the show, you know, we sat and we chatted with him, and he's incredibly interesting individual, very, very smart, and you know, really worthwhile listening to when you discuss things like history. He did put out an apology. He's like pulled himself back. He's no longer running for office because he feels that you know, he owes it to the public to pull that back. And he has apologized. Obviously, not a person of color. That's not my place to say whether it was good enough or not. I appreciate the fact that he was willing to say, yeah, I was wrong. I shouldn't have done that. And it wasn't just, you know, the usual, well, sorry, you got offended, whatever, it's your problem. It was a genuine, I understand that what I did was wrong. And, you know, I wish Liam the best. I hope there's a chance we can speak with him again. I think there's a lot of value in what he says. And honestly, he's, you know, he made a mistake, and all, you know, intentions aside, he shouldn't have done what he did, but he did, and there's no taking back. So we thank you to all the people who drove up our traffic last week, because our comments just went nuts, which is great for attention. So thanks for that.
Yeah, and in fairness, like everything that he's been public about before, this is never like, this is not a usual thing that he. So, in fairness, you know, like, I'm not going to justify his actions. I'm not going to apologize, you know, for it and say, well, it's one time, because what he did, he shouldn't have fucking done. But, you know, here we are now. I'm not going to pull, you know, the episode because, you know, of that. We can at least say, hey, he was wrong. Let's do better. And I will actually be reaching out to him to talk to him a little bit here in the next couple of weeks, just to kind of go through things with him and stuff like that. Because other than that, he was a great guest. But
Absolutely.
we our goal is to not help exemplify those that want to share racist themes.
Rhetoric.
You know, that's really not where we want to be. So.
Mm-hmm.
But without further ado, I don't know, buddy, are you ready to get into our vaccine segment with Abbie?
Hell yeah. Just sorry I couldn't be there.
All right. So here's my we had, and I'll caveat this. We did pre-record this. It had to be done on a Sunday afternoon. And I had a very limited block, and Abbie had a limited block, and it came together kind of last minute in response to some viewer questions that we had been receiving through email and through Twitter. So I thought it would be good to have her back on. Without further ado, here's her interview. And without further ado, please welcome Dr. Abbie to the show. How are you today, Abbie?
Not too well. Okay, a lot of pollen in the air. So like my right eye is twitching. I've been on Zyrtec now for weeks because I knew this was coming, and eye drops and nose spray, but the pollen is here in Atlanta. Like the city is in a haze right now. And like you can hear, I'm stuffy. Otherwise great. But the pollen has arrived in Atlanta. It is springtime.
Yeah, and that's kind of the same thing we have here in Michigan, is almost identical, because it's kind of like I have really bad allergies during the spring. Like I get congested, no reason, and like I should take medicine, but I hate, you know how I am. I'm anti-medicine in that aspect, that if it's not required, I'll just suffer through it.
Oh, I can't. It's so bad here. I can't function. Like I will claw my eyes out. Like they itch so bad. Like, oh, it's awful. Like, dude, I should take my computer out so you could see my car right now. It's insane. But yes, other than that, Super. Thank you for asking.
So tonight, what we wanted to do is just kind of go through a quick update. I have a few more questions. And I've seen other, other podcasts, like people have experts on and then nobody brings them back on. And it's like, well, we had you on like 3 months ago to kind of talk about the vaccine. And we've actually gotten a lot of views on that, probably because of the current condition, that everything is. And what I wanted to do really was just to kind of say, hey, what's new? I got a few questions. Can you answer them? And then we can close out that segment. But I think there's enough new people that are in between. Should they get it? Should they not get it? And whether I agree with those people or not, why not bring somebody on that can help answer those questions?
Yeah.
So, the first question, and this is one of the most the most ones I get, is if some people are not willing or not able to be vaccinated, should you get vaccinated to continue, or should you get vaccinated, right, is question one. The second one is, should you continue to wear your mask around them, or should we just be avoiding seeing them altogether? And that's for those that are, so if you let me explain it in a different way. If you have a friend that cannot get vaccinated because of their medical condition, and I have a couple of those friends, but once I'm fully vaccinated, the discussion is I'm still could be a carrier or a transmitter. So one of the most common questions are we supposed to continue to wear masks, or should we be avoiding them more often just because we could be a carrier and not know it?
Yes. So few different angles here. One is, again, just to be clear, I am a PhD scientist. I'm a laboratory researcher, and I will give you answers based on my expertise and what I would do personally as a virologist, as an immunologist, and my decades of experience at this point. And if any of your viewers have additional questions, they can take those to their doctors to get additional information. By no means am I one of those individuals who is telling you this is what you must do. We all, there are always going to be individual circumstances. So hopefully my answers will help your viewers articulate their questions better to their physicians to get the best answers to their unique situations.
So in other words, don't hold you accountable. So we'll put that disclaimer right on the thing.
Pretty much. Don't do, well, Abby said I could visit grandma and then you kill your grandma and it's my fault. No. So there are a few angles to the question that you just asked. And one is, if someone can't get vaccinated, what should you do? And I would say that someone who knows that they can't get vaccinated, those individuals through the past year have been very careful about going out and limiting their exposure in the world, wearing masks, double masking when they go out, limiting their contact with people coming into their homes, washing their hands. People who know they can't get vaccinated, when they are in a position to do so, or getting their deliveries or groceries delivered, it's a different kind of situation than the individuals who will not get vaccinated and refuse for political reasons, or through their misunderstanding of science, refuse vaccines. Those are very different situations. And one of those situations, the person who can't get vaccinated, you need to protect that individual. And so, yes, you need to be wearing a mask when you're around them, because even if you're vaccinated, because really any vaccine, the foundation of how a vaccine works, let's say a basic flu vaccine, you are injected with either a handicapped virus or a vaccine that contains just the proteins of a virus, or a dead virus, and it trains your immune system, either like the cellular components of your immune system, or the branch of your immune system that generates antibodies to fight that particular virus. In some instances, you might actually be infected with, let's say, the flu to a very low degree, but because your immune system already knows what to do, it fights it before you really show a lot of symptoms. So you might have very mild flu symptoms or not even know you have the flu because your body is doing what it's supposed to do because you've had the vaccine for the flu. A similar thing can happen, we think, with COVID. But in that instance, if you are around someone who hasn't been or can't be vaccinated, you can still spread it or could spread it, we think. So you need to protect that person, even though you've done the responsible thing, you've gotten your vaccine. You don't want to inadvertently put someone else at risk. Now, in the case of someone who refuses to get vaccinated, you need to mask for a different reason, and that is to protect yourself. Because in every unvaccinated, everyone always says, well, if you're vaccinated, why do you have to worry about whether I'm vaccinated or not? Well, because every unvaccinated individual is an opportunity for that virus to spontaneously, just by chance, develop mutations that allow it to evade your body's immune response to the vaccine. And we're worrying about this now, and you can hear about it in the news with the different mutations, the Brazil, the UK variant, the South Africa, the California variants. So the virus is not a thinking creature that's problem solving and saying, okay, if Fred has the vaccine, then I need to make these 7 mutations to get it. It's not thinking about it. It's just replicating. And just by chance, mutations happen. And by chance, it's going to make mutations that allow it to infect someone who's vaccinated. And if enough people are not vaccinated, these chance events are more likely to happen. So you don't know whether that chance event has happened in your friend who won't get vaccinated. And if they won't get vaccinated, they're likely one of the individuals who's also not wearing a mask and going out to bars and not washing their hands and doing all the things that you're not supposed to do during this pandemic. So again, you should be wearing your mask, but in this instance, to protect yourself.
Which I think that's kind of a good point, because my buddy and I had a discussion this weekend, and I've had my first dose, and I'm scheduled for my second one in 2 weeks. I think 2 weeks. I think it's every 3 weeks. So yeah, doing 2 weeks.
Depends on which one you get, whether it's
Pfizer.
3 or 4 weeks. Yeah, 3 weeks then.
Yep, I ended up with I got lucky because it was one of those random chance things. My wife was at Myers, and there's a line of people, and some lady goes, "Hey, have you been vaccinated?" And she's like, "Yeah, I work in healthcare. I got mine in January." And she's like,
"Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, they're giving free ones out right now to anybody." It's like,
go.
So
go.
my wife, she called me and texted me, and she's like, "You and James get in the car." You and my son get in the car and go now. And we did. And we got lucky. We got in there probably a half hour before they ran out. So now the irony is, I got a call from Spectrum Health and a call from Myers, a different branch, that offered me vaccines appointments.
See, that's the thing. It's like, it feels like the people, like, there's so many people who are still waiting, but it feels like, in my experience of when it gets close to your time, it's like frantic. I can't get it. You finally get one. And then it's just like a mad rush of like 800 different opportunities after you finally get one. And you're like, where were the opportunities 20 minutes ago? Like when I was free. They are coming take the first opportunity that comes your way
and move on.
Yes. And I would say too, the other vaccine side effect that I really wanted to take a moment to speak about on your show, because it wasn't really listed in the vaccine white papers, is guilt. I don't know whether you've spoken about this with many of your friends, but I've spoken about it with quite a few of my friends, especially in the medical fields, because we're coming up. 500,000 people are dead. 500,000 people are dead in the United States, and some of these people now getting the vaccines are feeling something along the lines of like a survivor's guilt, or even like I'm a young, healthy person. Don't give me the vaccine yet. Give it to someone else. I don't deserve it. Or like pushing off getting the vaccine, even though they do have the opportunity or they are eligible. This isn't the Titanic. Giving your life preserver, giving your vaccine to someone else isn't necessarily going to help anything. You aren't psychic, right? You don't know that you giving your vaccine to the next person in line is going to save anyone. If any, like maybe you're going to get exposed at the grocery store, and then you're going to pass it on as you go through the grocery aisles to someone else. Like we aren't psychic, right? We don't know the butterfly effect of everything. If you have the opportunity to get the vaccine, get the vaccine. You do not need to feel guilty about the many people who have died. That is not my fault. That's not your fault. That is there are lots of people who deserve to take the blame for the people who needlessly died. Yes, used to take responsibility and leadership, basic leadership and accountability for this pandemic. And it's not the average person, right?
And I think that's important because, like the wife and I have friends, we haven't seen them in a year and a half. They were a little bit heavier on that side. And over the course of COVID, they actually lost a bunch of weight. Actually, they got in shape. Not me.
Cool.
They did, right? But, they happened to just get COVID. They got their email or their text or whatever it was that says, hey, we're ready to serve you. And then they came down with symptoms and had to go get tested before they get their vaccine. Guess what? They both have been in the hospital now. And they're both my age. They're both in their mid to late 30s. And other than, they're probably a little healthier than I am to some extent because they've been doing proactive things to improve their health over the last year instead of sitting around and drinking and podcasting. And, we feel really bad, and we're using it as saying, hey, look, people our age are getting it, to go at, like I have some acquaintances, we'll just call them instead of that are questioning this. And it's like, well, these people are out. They're in the one person had to be put in the ICU for a day. This is some real shit. And they probably got it from the grocery store because one of them works at home and the other one most of the time works from home too. But there's a high probability they got it from a freaking grocery store. Or
just some chance event. So when you get the opportunity to get the vaccine, get the vaccine. Don't take it. Don't feel guilty. Move on. It is your job. Consider it your job to get the vaccine and protect yourself and protect your household, protect your community. That is how you're going to contribute to stopping this pandemic.
Yeah. So let's move on to I had a different question that's a little bit more technical that hopefully you'll be able to answer instead of more of this Dr. Feelgood type stuff, right? So, for example, mRNA has been studied for quite a while. There's a lot of studies out there that explain what it's supposed to do. We just never been able to turn it on. So the question is, and I've gotten this too, is people feel worried that because we don't know enough about mRNA, that this type of a vaccine could mutate in the future and do something to our bodies later in the future.
No. This is just a delivery system. It has no machinery to it. It is literally just I don't even really have an analogy for it. once it is in your body, it has the instructions to make, here's how I would describe it. When you get infected with a virus, or in this case, COVID, you get injected with the instructions to make the virus, the viral instruction, blueprints. Yeah. You are going to make every single protein that virus wants to replicate. And your body is going to recognize that that isn't right. And it is going to make an immune response to every single nook and cranny of those viral proteins. Now, the virus doesn't even necessarily care, because a lot of those proteins aren't exposed necessarily to the outside world. Like a lot of the interior proteins, your body can attack those interior proteins all at once. It's not going to stop the virus. It doesn't care. Like in a normal assembled virus, those inside proteins are hidden. But your body doesn't know that. So it's gonna spend all this time and energy figuring out how to fight these inside proteins that it's never going to see. So no matter what, whether you were infected with the virus, or in this case, the mRNA, what happens is we just deliver and only deliver the instructions to make one of the proteins of the virus. And this one is the one where if you make an immune response to it, you can stop the virus. So you get rid of all the extra proteins, the nonsense, the noise, and your body is only going to make an immune response to the really important part of the virus. And so like, it's almost like it's laser focusing your immune response instead of wasting a lot of energy. Mm-hmm. And also why I think it's cool is that I think I even might have mentioned this before on your show. Like when we make even just, killed viruses or live attenuated viruses in the lab, we need to make them in cell lines or chicken eggs or various other cells that aren't you. Or we make proteins in insect cells or bacteria or yeast. They aren't you. In this vaccine platform, you are making the protein. You are making it exactly how you would make it if you were infected with the virus. And you are folding it and decorating it with sugar exactly how you would make it, which might be a little bit different than the way my body would. So these vaccines are like tailor-made, laser focused. It's really cool. But there's no other machinery in it. There's no mechanism for it to mutate. It's not packaged with any other proteins, or there's no way for it to do that. I mean, it's going to degrade and your kidneys are going to filter it out. Like,
so it's just,
it's gone. Yeah. There's absolutely there's no biological mechanism by which it could even hypothetically
it's like
do
eating
anything.
A sausage. You eat a sausage, it's got a casing. The sausage digests, you get sustenance. The casing typically breaks down and then passes through in some way, shape, or form, depending on what type of casing it is.
Yes, but I would even suggest in some ways, those proteins and amino acids and fats become a part of you more than in this case. The vaccine is completely destroyed and secreted. Like no part of it is retained. No.
So another common question that kind of comes along with this one is the EUA process, right? Because we have all heard about the fact that they pushed it through. Now, I could be wrong, but from my understanding, essentially the normal process has one extra step for case study than the EUA. And that's really the only difference. And we don't need to go into the fact that the funding was there. A lot of people were working on it. That's all known. Anybody that doesn't believe that, whatever. We don't have to have that conversation. But people are still concerned a little bit about EUA saying, well, you just created an emergency process. You're just pushing this through the system. Even if you've done the research, it would not normally have come out this fast. So can you explain the EUA process a little bit and kind of just reference why they're just as safe for the most part?
So absolutely no safety measures were skipped in this process whatsoever. Like no safety anything was skipped. What my understanding why things were able to go so quickly is really a financial issue. More, it wasn't really a scientific issue, it was a financial issue. So normally what happens is, you go through phase 0, phase 1, phase 1, 2, phase 2, phase 3, and things go on in a linear time. And it would even take much longer than the current time, but just because science takes a long time. And then once everybody was really happy and investors were happy and everything, and then you would start manufacturing, and then you would figure out distribution, and then you would figure out all of these other things. Financially, the US pumped a lot of money into manufacturing before we even knew whether this was going to work or not. We figured this would probably work. This virus is kind of dumb in comparison to, it's not HIV, for example. We figured this should work, but it might not have. But we had a good idea this would work. So the US government pumped a ton of money into manufacturing before we hit the end. And that's how we were able to deploy the vaccines right as the results of the trials were unblinded. And that's the other thing too, through all of this, everything was double blind. None of the safety measures were skipped. Everything was double blind until, I laugh about this. I had a meeting scheduled it was a Monday morning when all of these vaccine trials were unblinded, and all of my colleagues are physicians. And so they had to cancel and run off and do all of these meetings with news stations and all this sort of thing, because we didn't even know when these studies were going to be unblinded and what the data was going to show. So there were the shortcuts were made really on the financial and infrastructure side, not at all on the safety side.
Which is good. And I think that helps people feel better.
And it could have been a bust, right? They could have put a ton of money into this, and then we unblinded the data, and it was 25% effective. But I mean, like I said, this isn't necessarily a complicated virus, so I didn't anticipate that was going to be an issue. Or, I mean, worst case scenario, we could have vaccinated the individuals, and the people who got the vaccine were infected at a higher rate than the people who got the placebo. That's not unheard of. But again, that didn't happen. So.
Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I think, like I said, I think the idea here, right, is that we talk a little bit more as new information comes available. I mean, in fairness, in 3 months, if we see death rates go down, right, and the vaccination rate, is skyrocketing, we know that it worked, in America at least, and then we can start talking about what the future looks like. But I think it's kind of silly. I put in there, when are we going to get hugs? Yeah, I'm not going to get a hug. You solved it. If you're unvaccinated, I'm not going to wear a mask. I'm going to wear a mask, or we ain't hanging out. That's just it. I'm just done. I'm not going to play games. I don't want a mutated version. And you're right, But I think, in a couple of months, maybe we'll have you come back. We'll look at the death rates, and then we can say, hey, what's in the future? Is there any discussion plans now that we went through phase 1 of vaccination? What are we going to do for phase 2? Because this may be something we have to get every year until this kind of peters out, right? And whatever. So what? So it's like I get my flu vaccine every year. So if I have to get a COVID vaccine too, I guess I'm not too upset. So
Yeah, and
Anyway.
they're working on combined flu COVID mixes as well, because I mean that's just what we are anticipating.
Yep. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your night tonight to have a conversation with me, and we'll have you back on in a couple of months to update, and hopefully something new happens, and hopefully we'll start seeing the death rate start to decrease. So cool. Well, thanks so much, Abbie. And have a good night.
You
Well, there we go. So if you were wondering about the COVID vaccine and whether you should get it or not, there you go. You're muted, buddy. I unmuted you.
I see that.
Either way. So thank you again, everyone, for paying attention to that. That clip will be available on the website as a standalone video this week. I have it already set aside. I'm just debating if I want to add intros or anything to it. I don't know. Maybe I'll just not do that either. But we will make just that video set aside in case you want to share it with your friends without them having to listen to Keith and I yammer on for, the next hour that we usually do. So either which way. So, Keith, there has been an interesting development.
You don't say.
There is, yeah. And it's kind of funny because we were going to cover Jordan Peterson tonight, right? And we still are. We're not going to not cover Jordan Peterson because we have to. Like, it's pretty much a mandate that we cover them, But you were what was the big reason you wanted to cover Jordan Peterson tonight? And then we could relate it to our next pseudo guest that we're going to talk about.
I don't know how much it really relates to what we're going to go into, but I've wanted to talk about this for a while. Now I know it's probably a little later. He's not as prominent, and people like him, they're not quite the big figures that they are. But I still think that this is worth talking about because one of the things that really drove me nuts, former coworker of mine was like suckled at the teat of Jordan Peterson, and it would drive me nuts because anything the guy said was, profound and amazing. And I made the mistake of listening to him one day, and honestly, it sounded like every unpleasant conversation I had in university with somebody who was like in a first year philosophy or psychology course, because they think they know everything and they'll use all the biggest words that they can, and sometimes they'll even use them right enough to sound smart and fool people. But when you know what they're talking about or are familiar enough with what they're talking about, you can generally cut through the bullshit and be like, wow, you are an idiot. You just have no idea what the hell you're doing here, do you? But golly, you do seem to be thriving somehow. And this is something that really drives me nuts. So Jordan Peterson, a lot of you may remember him. A lot of you might try to be like me and forget about him. Now I know that the segment is a loaded question. But honestly, because I did have this conversation with somebody who's a lot smarter than I am, and they're curious, so I hope they get a chance to listen to this. One of the biggest things that rose Peterson to claim is his whole gender roles and his involvement with Bill C-16 in Canada. And this was back in 2016, 2018? Good Lord, you think I'd remember that small of a detail, but
2017.
2017. I feel like I'm coming out like Rumpelstiltskin, like, what year is this? But anyways.
At least you haven't had COVID, so I heard
as
COVID
far as I know,
kills brain cells. I also heard COVID gives you ED, but
well,
saying.
Shit. Let's put a pin in that one and come back later. So Sorry, I think I've got the links kind of set up here just right. So, if asked, I think Jordan Peterson, along with a lot of other right-wing conservative centrist talking head types, can all be summed up beautifully in one of the first paragraphs of the Guardian article that I included. Really, I mostly included it for that paragraph, but it did include a link to a video as well. And the Guardian article is called "How Dangerous is Jordan B. Peterson, the Right-Wing Professor Who Hit a Hornet's Nest?" And this is, of course, referring to a video series that he did being critical of the move to protect gender identity under discriminatory law. But what the section of the paragraph that I wanted to focus on was, and this is in reference to an infamous interview that Peterson did with Kathy Newman. So here's the little bit that I pulled out here. Quote, "The Canadian psychology professor and culture warrior Jordan B. Peterson could not have hoped for better publicity than his recent encounter with Kathy Newman on Channel 4 News. The more Newman inaccurately paraphrased his beliefs and betrayed her irritation, the better Peterson came across." End quote. And that I think perfectly embodies so many trolls. They deliberately set up their views to be confusing, and so that they can claim that they're being misrepresented, even though thinking people will look and be like, no, you're just trying to change our perception of what you said so it doesn't look like you said what you said. And they do this by talking circles. And those of us who are, older or more familiar, or an older skeptical circle, say like 5-10 years ago, would be familiar with a strategy referred to as the Gish Gallop. And if you've never heard of it, that's basically a strategy where you throw out as much bullshit as you can, as fast as you can, in as small amount of time as you can, so that your opponents just don't have the ability to correct everything, because each pile of shit that you leave out on the table requires at least 10 times the effort to correct and get into the nuance of. So it's not explicitly the exact same or even matching the criteria for the Gish Gallop, but it's the shotgun of bullshit tactic, and it's basically the fleshlight to pseudo-intellectual conservative masturbation, basically. It's not always their go-to, but it's definitely a fan favorite. And this is to say nothing of seeing a tiny hole and, just wiggling their fingers enough to invent a problem and make, a mountain out of, just a pebble in the road, because we all know that they love to sit there and harp on just those very small outliers of data and act like that should be what informs the law instead of, the broader implications of certain things, right?
Yeah. And I think Peterson has made a splash in the past, like, I'll be honest, he's never anybody I've followed ever. Like, he bothered the piss out of me. Not like I found even listening to him, like, that I was losing intelligence. Like, at least when Sam Harris speaks, there's a little bit of intelligence there, even though he speaks a lot of garbage too. Jordan Peterson, it was like Dinesh D'Souza, almost like that's kind of how I felt I was listening to when I hear him talk. I just don't see the attraction, to this. I mean, and I could play. I don't know how long is the clip.
Jordan,
this one's like
you
half an
said that
hour.
Men need to, quote, grow the hell up. Tell me why.
Well, because there's nothing uglier than an old infant. There's nothing good about it. People who don't grow up don't find the sort of meaning in their life that sustains them through difficult times, and they're certain to encounter difficult times. And they're left bitter and resentful and without purpose and adrift and hostile and resentful and vengeful and arrogant and deceitful and of no use to themselves and of no use to anyone else, and no partner for a woman, and there's nothing in it that's good.
So you say, I mean, that's
so just that, like, and if you watch that interview, and I won't say that I haven't endured it, but like listening to him speak sometimes it's grating, and it's just like, I get that technically, how he made his living, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't get him.
if he had just left it at that first little bit here, we're saying, you know, nobody likes an overgrown infant, he would have made a very legitimate point, because that's something that we frequently find ourselves saying, you know, when we see, you know, white men denying their privilege or acting like rape culture isn't a thing. They're sending unsolicited dick pics, shit like that. We're sitting here saying, yo, you need to grow up. Like, that is not okay. And had he just left it at that and not tried to, you know, make himself sound even more profound by expanding upon it and throwing a lot of big words that don't mean what he thinks they mean at it, he would have had a solid point that could have been like, you know what, it's a little ambiguous, but I can get behind it. And I think that's part of, you know, what the appeal, and part of the reason why people like him are so polarizing, is because it sounds like he's saying one thing, it sounds like he's saying another. You have to really dive into it. And unfortunately, the amount of effort that goes into parsing his meaning and the implications of what he's saying, it just takes so damn long. And it's so much easier to just go, yeah, that sounds smart. Yeah, okay. I don't understand it, but I think I understand it. It's just so much easier to follow the intellectually non-effortful way to just go, oh yeah, no, that makes sense. And instead of actually critically thinking and challenging it. And part of the problem is, of course, the education system isn't as geared towards critical thinking as it should be, which is a whole other separate issue. But, you know, so once you start getting into it, like if you actually look at the words that he's using, you start to find the little problems, the little flaws. In a conversation, you know, he apparently has a very amateurish understanding. One of his big claims to fame apparently is his discussion of what the hell is the term in mythology? Model, not models. Basically, just talking about, you know, the structure of mythology, frameworks, and shit like that. Is apparently he has a very crude and biased understanding of it, and I guess he would not even be able to, or he's not even at an undergraduate level, basically, for his understanding of those types of things. Archetypes, that's the word I was looking for. So he's apparently has a very amateurish understanding, and I'm not somebody who is well versed in mythology. I listened to a crash course series of lectures on mythology over the course of a couple of days while I was painting the house. So I am by no means an expert in analysis of mythology. I think it's fascinating as hell. So if I weren't somebody who, you know, were aware of his spin and the way he perceives the world, I might fall for some of his bullshit. And that's the problem with the intellectual dark web, I think. Another thing that I've picked up and wanted to kind of touch on is there's a little bit of a twist that to the way a lot of these talking head types present themselves, and it's taking advantage of the audience. And I want you to, like, if you ever have the misfortune of listening to these things, they deliberately set themselves up and direct the conversation to go exactly where they want it to go, so they can get to their gotcha point. This is why, you know, Benny Shaps threw a little fit on BBC, even though he was being interviewed by somebody who, you know, shared his side on the political spectrum. He was being interviewed by a conservative, but because he couldn't control the conversation and take it where he wanted, he's never had to defend himself. He's so used to being on the attack. He got fed up because it wasn't going the way he wanted, so he threw a little temper tantrum and stomped out. And it's the second quickest and easiest way to win, quote unquote, win an argument. It's the only way you could be like quicker and lazier about it is to do what Ben Shaps loves to do, which is go to college campuses and have a Q&A and stand up at the podium and have them stand below you. So not only are you already physically kind of imposing because, you know, you have the high ground, but you've already got, you know, the attention and, you know, probably a couple of allies, I guess, in your audience. And you're being asked by college students who are upset about what you're saying because what you're saying is invalidating their existence. So they're upset. You know, I've noticed that you're likely to see people who have issues with anxiety about like public speaking, but they're there because they genuinely want to challenge this. They want to be better and they want to see this rhetoric be challenged. And unfortunately, they get to play off of these people's anxieties, you know, and unfortunately, I've watched far too many of these OMG liberal pwned bullshit garbage videos to know that never, under any circumstances, will there be intellectual integrity enough to feature a video where Happy Shappy has his ass verbally handed to him. You know, he knows that this isn't going to happen in these venues because college kids who give a fuck have never had to deal with his style of, and it's not even argumentation, to be honest. It's just trickery, coercion, manipulation flying under the guise of intellectual thought. And, you know, think about it that way, it's kind of no wonder so many edgelords viciously attack rape culture, because it's their MO for everything. You know, it's kind of like they have a rape culture towards life.
Yeah. And I don't know, it's like, I don't know. That guy, he's just, the problem I have is that, yes, because he tried, I don't know, do you think he's trying to explain it, you know, like with that lower education mentality, or is it just kind of like, this just happened and he just can't speak any better?
Peterson?
You know, 'cause like, yeah, because some people will talk down to you, right? And and you know, like, sometimes you're like, all right, you're talking down to me, motherfucker. Like, let's have that conversation, you know? And then other times you're like, well, I don't know. You know, are they really talking down to me? What is that, you know, type of mentality? And like with Peterson and the way he wants to explain things is he wants to come off as that expert. But at the same time, he's just taking right-wing talking points. It's like Tucker Carlson, right? He's just taking right-wing talking points and spewing this garbage about, you know, the gender debate, right? And it's not a debate, but they want to make it a debate because that's how they win. And one of the other articles that you had brought up actually kind of explained a little bit more in depth what that specific bill was, right?
Yep. So I've actually kind of structured it. So we're going to talk about the bill last. We're going to lead into it. Yeah. But if you wanted to pull up the article from the Torontoist, that would be helpful, because that article kind of does a great job of informing the entirety of what we're going to be discussing. It touches on all aspects of it. And a little later on, I'm going to go into the legality of what's being discussed here. But I figured if I took my shots and made my points about Peterson first, you know, I would give myself time later, and I'd make sure that I was more thoughtful and all of that. I actually spent the better part of the last couple of days actually like doing a full-blown deep dive into this. So, you know, I did my homework this time. It's weird. So I'm not going to cover as much of his bullshit as I can, because there's so much out there. But we're going to focus on one particular piece. And I don't know if it's necessarily how he rose to fame, but it's certainly how he became more of a household name, I think. And it definitely aligned him with a lot of the people he's accused of being aligned with, you know, like the alt-right Proud Boys type of shit.
Yeah.
And I'm going to put out a disclaimer here, and it's the only one I'm doing. Do not use your main account to look up any of the videos. And I'm not kidding when I say that I use private incognito mode, like literally the internet browsers that I would use at 2 a.m. looking up the weird porn that, you know, you get interested in and those weird niche fetishes. I'll use those browsers to watch the alt-right videos just to make sure that it does not screw with my metrics, because it will ruin the next month of my Google and YouTube searches. And I've got them in a good spot right now. And this weird hobby of mine of watching these bullshit videos, it brings the same level of shame as some of those bizarre late night fetishes you don't know you have, but you decide to indulge in because nobody's watching. And Pepper Ridge Farm remembers. So, with all of that, with all of the prefacing out of the way here, what exactly did Peterson have to say? Well, what could he have taken so much offense to? Well, according to him, it's an underground apparatus of radical left political motivations forcing gender-neutral pronouns on him, aka the federal amendment to add gender identity and expression to the protections under the Canadian Human Rights Act. Yeah, that's it. He just didn't want to respect somebody who opted to use gender-neutral pronouns or pronouns of the gender that they weren't assigned at birth. An opinion piece put it this way. Quote, failure to use a person's pronoun of choice, like ze, zir, they, or any one of a multitude of other potential non-words will land you in hot water with the commission. That, in turn, can lead to orders for correction, apology, Soviet-like re-education, fines, and in cases of continued non-compliance, incarceration for contempt of court. This peril is exactly what Peterson warned of in his video, for which he was mocked for scaremongering. And that was an opinion piece from the National Post, of all places, in favor or on Peterson's side, in case you couldn't tell by the use of Soviet-like re-education. And the entire argument about why gender identity should not be protected under human rights is basically they are saying that you could be sent to jail for simply misgendering someone, which, as we all know, is complete and utter bullshit. But Peterson doubled down, and he even referred to it as compelled speech, saying that, and went as far as saying he would not use students' preferred pronouns. Now, he set up the term compelled speech basically as this demonic sibling to free speech, where instead of, hate speech laws saying, well, you can't say this, compelled speech is, you must say that. And they're being argued against, and it's the straw man. The straw man is that you're being forced to say something that you don't agree with. So basically, he's admitting to disagreeing with the humanity of the broad spectrum that is gender identity, because it's fundamental to people like him who want to force monogamy and maintain gender roles. So, I mean, I guess you could say, credit given where credit due, there's at least some consistency to his persona, but that's not the best he should be hoping for.
that's not what you want to be known for, I guess.
No.
Like, and that's the thing with him, right? Like, this is not the first time he's done this, right?
No.
And it's not his first foray into free speech laws. He's been a huge critic of that for a long time. Mm-hmm. And that's it. I'm going to lump Sam Harris in there now, because there you go. Sam Harris is kind of similar to that whole thing too. He's very anti these laws people want to create. Now, Sam Harris isn't tied, to Canada or to this, right?
Thankfully.
But it doesn't mean he doesn't still have an opinion on, what it is.
Right. So basically the setup that they're trying to make is step 1, incorrectly referred to somebody using the wrong pronouns. Step 2, go to jail. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Now, obviously, becoming a protected human right does not mean that there wouldn't be some measures taken against those who violate the basic human rights of another. Like, that's kind of the point of having these whole human rights and human rights tribunals. Like, nobody's going to disagree with that. But here's the work that you would actually have to go to go to jail for misgendering someone. Step 1, discriminate against or harass somebody based on their gender identity / expression. If you're an asshole and misgender somebody deliberately and continuously and do it just because it gets a rise out of them, that could probably be considered harassment. You're found in violation of the law. You're ordered to pay a fine, apologize, take a course on sensitivity, basically something that might make you give up, an afternoon, inconvenience you slightly. Step 4, refuse to follow through on the judge's orders. Step 5, be found in contempt of court. Step 6, continue to refuse to comply with being a decent human being. Step 7, maybe wind up in prison, probably not. And that's literally it. Like, you need to take it so much further than misgendering. You need to be misgendering someone to the point where you are creating hostility and making a case that you hate them because of that reason. That's the reason you hate them. And that's basically what this is about, is making a case that people are, worthy of protection for their gender identity and gender expression, because as we're coming to realize, gender is not a binary. It's not. It's a spectrum. And holding that against somebody is just flat out shitty. The old mantra, trans rights are human rights, and that's it.
Well, and I think here, and this is like the, Rush Limbaugh. There you go. This is like a Rush Limbaugh-ish, discussion, except for he's not very good at what he does compared to Rush was, Rush made millions. I don't know. Maybe Jordan Peterson does too, but he's not as famous as Rush. I'll put it that way.
I think at one point he was pulling in over $10,000 a month on his Patreon alone.
Crazy. That's Sam Harris. Anyway, let's move on. That's still not millions of dollars. $10,000 a month. Still only
just Patreon plus his book money.
But
plus, for a while, he was still a practicing psychologist.
I don't know how, but yeah.
Anyway,
but okay. The idea that if you speak something, they're gonna charge you, and maybe it's different in Canada. But if you walk around in Canada and you salute a Nazi flag and say whatever the Nazi term is, I don't know how to, like, Sigil or whatever.
Yeah.
Are you going? Do you get put in jail in Canada? Is that like a thing?
No.
Okay. So
Germany, maybe. Canada, no.
What'd you say?
Germany, maybe, because they have a lot. That's part of their history. They're like, we don't want to be associated with this. We want to be distanced from it. We're learning, okay?
So that's fair. But in Canada, they don't. So you're not going to get put in jail for misgendering somebody. Now, I'll tell you what. If you stand on a street corner and you ask every person that walks by what their gender is, and then correct them based on what you feel it should be, and you did that, and this is hilarious, and this is why this is funny to me, and this is why I'm kind of glad you picked this, because in Canada, I always think of, like, and you gave the example during winter, if somebody doesn't clean off their back windshield, you don't beep your horn and scream at them. You guys stop your car, you get your snow brush, you go to the back of the car, and you wipe it off so that they can see out their back window. And you go, please wipe your car and get back into your thing. And maybe you say, and wear a toque, or, hey buddy, or whatever the hell you guys say. But you all don't, like, it's Canada. Canada's friendly. And I'll be honest, I mean, I met some angry Canadians before, right? But it was at a bar. We'd all been drinking, and when you say hockey's better in America, that's some fighting words. I'll tell you that right now. That could be some big fight words if you're not careful, especially drunk people in a bar, especially in Quebec. But
Quebec.
Either which way, if he wants to continue his lectures, I don't know if they're even going to arrest him for that. Right? Will he get a fine? It's only when he starts to use it as a machine to create large quantities of propaganda, as well as to enforce, his ideology onto other people. And if you came to America, it'd be the same thing. We have Nazis that stand on corners. We have Christians that stand on corners and tell you you're going to go to hell. I mean, these people have big signs that against LGBTQ people completely, and they don't go to jail. We don't do anything about them. Like, it's people like me who go up and harass them to the point where I hope they go away. And the majority of the time, it's just to get them to stop, saying what they're saying, because it distracts them long enough that they're not able to spew their hate to other ears. And not that most people even believe half of what those people are saying, right? Like, I mean, how many people in his classes and reading his book are like, oh yeah, I believe everything that guy says. But the problem is that if you can use your status, and we've talked about this, like with Harvey Weinstein, he uses his status to influence other people to get favors. Peterson's not getting favors, but Peterson's pushing his agenda that now at least your government, in fairness, is recognizing as something that needs to be protected, and it shouldn't be something. And it's the same way. You can't yell fire in a fucking movie theater. You can't legally do that. You can be fined, and you can be arrested for that. How many people really are? I don't know, because I've never heard anybody yell fire in a fucking theater, because that's just the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. And it's the same way. You don't need to misgender somebody. You can just accept that you don't agree with it and just call them what they want to be called. And the funny thing is, and this is a personal thing for me, but I had a habit of saying guys all the time at work. It was a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Be like, hey guys. And I ended up having, a mixed group of people that was not all men reporting to me for a little while, right? I worked towards changing that because I realized that, hey, I'm not talking to all men right now, so I probably shouldn't say that, because why do I want to call all these other people? And even if people are like, oh, well, who cares? It's just a stupid idiom, but it means something, right? It means something. It is something. It's the same thing. If I can't learn to just respect whatever gender pronoun you want to say, who am I? And I'll tell you what, if you told me to call you cat, I probably would just call you a cat. I don't care. Now if you tell me I got to let you have 7 breaks during the day to take naps and drink out of a water bowl, all right. At work, we got a problem. At home, do what you want. But at work, we probably got a problem because I ain't giving anybody 7 breaks a fucking day. That's not how this works, And so the issue with Jordan Peterson is, and people like him, is they take this to such a fucking extreme that we're all sitting here going, dude, just chill out. A, grow up. And B, all you have to do is just ignore their gender. You can just use they or them. And I do that all the time. And I've had somebody correct me before. They're like, well, I'm actually not non-binary. I identify as a male. And it's like, okay, I'm sorry. I've trained my brain to say those things so I don't accidentally misstep myself and say her or him in the wrong context. It's just simple. I don't know. I hate this guy. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I'm right there with you.
I gave me so much.
I fully agree. Like I know I still have to untrain the term guys, because for me it's a reflexive word, and I don't always catch myself saying it, and it's something that I need to work on, and I'm trying to work on. I don't expect myself to always be perfect, but I do believe that I should be able to hold myself accountable enough to continue to be better and make sure that I'm not making anybody feel like their existence matters less, because it doesn't. If you're not adhering to the gender binary that people try to enforce on you, I see you. You're valid. I don't want you to feel like you coming into my space, you're going to be disrespected. I want you to feel welcome. And I mean, honestly, it's a little thing, and I don't like the pushback is just out of laziness, because people don't want to work on themselves. They don't think that they need to be better because they already think that they're doing fine. And while they may not be explicitly engaging in discriminatory practice, there are subtle nuances to language that are exclusive and do basically leave people out of the dust. And so that's, it's easy for me to just use words like dude or guy or, things like that to refer to, a multitude of people, because in my mind, I may have disassociated gender from them, but that doesn't mean that applies to, greater society. It's a simple thing. Somebody says, please don't refer to me as that. Instead of giving into the knee-jerk response of fuck off. No. Accept that. Understand that that's a person who's saying, hey, this is who I am. I want you to know who I am. That's me. This is me. And, you don't have to jump all over it. You don't have to idolize it, worship it, whatever. But you should respect it. And the problem is, why don't you want to respect it? So now that we're going to come back from that tangent. So yeah, Jordan Peterson flat out lied. He is uncomfortable with people discovering their own gender identity. And that's probably because, he gets bullied for sounding like Kermit the Frog got his scrotum caught in a vice. But what more can you expect from a guy who is so lacking in intellectual integrity that he set up a straw man on what political correctness is? And this is an actual quote of his from a video of his that I watched. He describes political correctness as, quote, a paradoxical amalgam of postmodernism which originated as a form of philosophy and literary criticism and Marxism and neo-Marxism. And that, end quote, and that is word salad so chaotic that it leaves thinking people who are actually trying to break things down and follow it instead of leaping to conclusions and filling the gaps with their own biases, and it just leaves them saying, what? Because that's all it is it's verbal diarrhea everywhere.
Yep.
And there's nothing, it sounds intellectual because there's, big words, but that doesn't mean shit. So we're just going to go back to the Toronto. Oh, you're still on there. Perfect. Okay. So to sum up his argument, basically he says, misgendering someone could constitute hate speech. But from a legal standpoint, experts they're like, they have no idea how something like misgendering would constitute hate speech. And Canada's court system has a pretty high threshold for what constitutes hate speech. And the nature of the speech would actually have to be so much more extreme than just using the wrong pronouns, even in a trollish, brutish way. So for comparison, using the wrong pronouns is nowhere near the level of advocating for genocide, which is essentially what this bill is hoping to deal with. So the provisions of the code, they're not about misgendering. But if he were to champion the idea that trans people should all be killed, well, then there'd be a case for hate speech right there. But another big part of the issue and the complicating factors that people, use to hide behind because it's easier than acknowledging the problems with what he said was the involvement of the Ontario Human Rights Commission and their policy on preventing discrimination because of gender identity and gender expression. And it what that outlines under their policy, essentially his responsibility would be to accept requests for accommodation in good faith. And they do add a caveat saying that, if there's evidence that it is not good faith, then that does not constitute good faith. He would be responsible for making reasonable requests for only information that is necessary to clarify the nature and extent of the accommodation needed for the situation. He's a teacher. He's got to know his students or his clients, unfortunately. Making sure that information related to accommodation is kept confidential and shared only with people who need the information for their role in implementing the accommodation. So he's not allowed to go spreading it, which is an action that requires energy. Acting in a timely way and taking an active role in looking for solutions for accommodation and covering any appropriate costs related to the accommodation, which, I mean, if one of your students or your clients is undergoing transition, there's really not going to be any cost to you, so that really is a non-issue. Now, the students who would seek accommodation would be responsible for telling the accommodation provider, so employer, landlord, service provider, when they have code-related needs that require accommodation, providing information relevant to their needs and meeting any agreed upon standards once accommodation has been provided, and cooperating in the accommodation process to the best of their ability. So basically saying, this is for you, this is about you, if you're not on board, we're not on board, type of thing. Which, I mean, the one thing that I really admire, and I don't want to say envy, but I do respect about, the LGBTQ plus community. And this is a conversation that I had with a friend of mine who is trying to understand if they want to transition or not, is by existing or living a life that is not clearly defined by the heteronormative gender roles, you actually have to find yourself, and you get to determine your role. You get to determine, you don't let society determine who you are. You're actually determining yourself. You're setting the boundaries. You're paving the way for, what makes for your best life. And, in relationships, even when it's not just the simple male female dynamic, as we've, so commonly seen and is forced down our throats all the time. When you don't have that model to build off of, you have to set up your own relationships, and you learn so much more about yourself. And I genuinely think that that's something that is taken advantage of in, the heteronormative society and in heterosexual couples. it's just it's almost lazy because you don't have to do a lot of work because who you are in the relationship is already decided for you. So
Yeah, and
sorry, go on. Oh no, I was just going to carry on, but if you got something to add, go bring it.
Well, and I think, you know, when you ask about whose responsibility or whose liability it is, I think it's interesting to see where that lies, right? Because I think it's a little different. In America, we have corporations as people. So, you know, I mean, there's that thing, you know. I don't know if Canada has the same thing.
Oh, that's a good question, actually.
I don't think you do. For my understanding, and it's basic, I don't think you do. But, you know, and I think that's the big thing right there is where does that liability fall? What does it want to do? And like, you know, like your document or the article says is that ultimate responsibility to maintain an environment free from discrimination is not anything new to society, right? It's not new, man. I don't know. I don't like, I think, you know, the difference is all we're doing is extending it from men and women to men, women, and those who identify as non-binary. And that's it.
Yeah.
You know, and the best thing could be is you could just say, don't discriminate. And if you are doing something you wouldn't do to another person, you shouldn't fucking do it. And if you are doing it and the majority of other people won't do that to any certain person, anybody, then you're probably in the wrong. You know?
Yeah, probably. So under the OHRCP or OHRC, God, that acronym is even harder than the full-blown thing. So Peterson taught at University of Toronto, so it's in Ontario. So according to the OHRC, the U of T had the legal duty and ultimate responsibility to maintain an environment free from discrimination and harassment because of gender identity and expression, which means that, quote, any act or thing done or omitted to be done in the course of his or her employment by an officer, official, employee, or agent of a corporation, trade union, trade or occupational association, unincorporated association, or employers organization shall be deemed to be an act or thing done or omitted to be done by the corporation, trade union, trade, occupational association, etc., end quote. And the term vicarious liability was brought up according to the OHRC policy. This make an employer responsible for discrimination arising from the acts of one of its employees or agents done in the normal course, whether or not it had any knowledge of, participation in, or control over these actions. So basically, the U of T could be held responsible for discriminatory actions committed by its employees. And this is going to bring us to what triggered the anti-PC police so much. Bill C-16. What a fun little bill it was. So it was essentially a proposal, and Tanner, if you wanted to pull up the CBC, because it had a really good broken down explanation here. Bill C-16 was a proposal to add gender identity and orientation to the Canadian Human Rights Act, which would mean that it would protect members of the trans community from being denied employment based on the gender that they identify with or outwardly express. That's, of course, a little bit of a simplistic explanation. So this would be accomplished by adding gender identity to the criminal code under section 718.2, where there were sentencing principles that should be taken into consideration when a court imposes a sentence. So, for instance, evidence showing that the action was motivated by bias, prejudice, or hate against a particular group would essentially be would be looked at as evidence towards, is this a discriminatory or hateful act, and does this violate the protection of somebody's gender identity under Canadian human rights? And just for perspective, the list of protected groups under the anti-discrimination laws already at this time were race, national/ethnic origin, language, skin color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical disability, and sexual orientation. And next up, under Section 318, subsection 4, with Section 318 being hate propaganda, would also be updated regarding hate propaganda. So this means that gender expression would be added to the to expand the definition of an identifiable group for advocating genocide against. And this all came because in 2015, Canada did a little research, and a study was done in Ontario, and it found that of transgender, transsexual, or transitioned people, 96% had heard that trans people were not normal. 73% had been made fun of for being trans. 20% had been physically or sexually assaulted for being trans. And this is just people who reported it. 13% were fired for being trans, while another 15% had also been fired, but were not sure why. And 10% of trans emergency room patients reported having care stopped or denied. And basically seeing that this particular group faces a disproportionate amount of discrimination of these kinds, it was decided that something needed to be done. And so this came in light, or preceding this is a report from 1999, which even suggested that as far as human rights are concerned, that while in practice, members of the trans community are protected on the grounds of sex or combined grounds of sex and disability, quote, to leave the law as it stands would fail to acknowledge the situation of transgendered individuals and allow the issues to remain visible. While these issues are clearly related to sex, this ground may not cover all those encountered in the transgendered experience, especially in the decision to undergo a sex change and its implementation. To say transsexualism is a disability seems to make it a medical matter rather than a matter of life experienced in the opposite gender, end quote. And that essentially is, or that can be basically summed up as saying is like, well, technically, yes, the definitions were already there. This did apply some unfair labels and did invalidate the other parts of the experience, which I thought was insightful almost, especially since that came from, 22 years ago. And since the Canadian legal system is informed by case law, much like Merca, and if my wife were here to hear me say that, she'd either be impressed that I used it properly or she'd throw out something at me for using it improperly. Case law is, of course, when legal precedence is set on a case-by-case basis, informing how certain laws are informed. And again, this is how it is in Merca. It was realized that where discrimination cases involving gender identity and expression were not necessarily frequent, and since the cases that do arise can cause substantial harm to those affected and legal protection was warranted, it was decided that more needed to be done to ensure that the transgender experience was validated and seen as human. So I hope that explains a fair bit of why Jordan Peterson is either intellectually as lazy as it gets, or he's a liar, plain and simple, to try to make himself look better. Fun stuff that happened was when I looked through this, I found a couple of fun little subreddits about, they were talking about little issues with this, and oh dear God, my links did not come through. No, stupid shared cloud. There are subreddits about, people who have been jailed for violating Bill C-16 and all of that, but I'll just have to put those in the show notes and let Tanner carry on, because it looks like he's excited to move on to the next one too.
Yeah, and so the reason when we say, when we go, oh, who is, what's the difference between this guy and the next guy we're going to talk about? And you're right, like Jordan Peterson has never technically been accused of soliciting child pornography. He does spew a lot of lies and hatred. And there's a gentleman, I don't know if you know who he is, named Matt Gaetz. I don't know if that's how you say it or not. Gaetz. I like Gaetz better. I'm going to say Gaetz because that's how.
Gaetz.
Yeah. And essentially what's kind of happened, right, is he has been accused of inquiring of underage sex or sex with an underage girl. There you go. Now this guy, not only does he look really creepy, I mean honestly, that's pretty villainish right there.
Oh yeah.
I mean, especially with the uncanceled, this is the CPAC convention. No one wore masks. They didn't know how to social distance. Trump came and saluted everybody and waved for 10 minutes at the beginning, that type of thing. But this guy has been a die-hard Trump supporter. He's
suckler?
very against giving any money to the American people. He thinks we should reopen, and he essentially doesn't believe the virus exists. The only thing that could happen to this guy that would make me laugh even harder than what he's being accused of is if he came down with COVID. Period. You'd just be like, oh, you're under investigation and you got COVID. Now, I wanted to cover this tonight, not because Jordan Peterson is a, child molester or supports underage sex, because that's not that. But Jordan Peterson likes to, spew the caveat of why do I need to give you a gender, and people are immoral who, want to identify as a different gender because that's not how this works and blah, blah, blah. The idea here is it's a very similar rhetoric to what this guy speaks in America, right? This guy has openly accused all sorts of crazy things across the board. This dude's nuts.
Oh yeah.
He
Florida.
is now being investigated for having a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old and paid her to travel with him, according to some people. Now, this is not what drew me to the whole thing. This is pretty shocking. I guess technically speaking, his friend or associate was under investigation already for similar type of things.
Really?
And yes, so it was never a big story, and I don't know. I guess I never know why these things are not big stories, right? You would think they would be. But there is a lot of statues okay, I'm sorry. How old do you think this guy is?
Oh, he's late 30s, early 40s.
Yeah. If you're in your late 30s or early 40s, you shouldn't date an 18-year-old. I'll just say it. To me, that's pretty weird.
Yeah.
And maybe it's because my son is 18, and I know, how crazy it is to have an 18-year-old son. I don't have an 18-year-old daughter yet, but my daughter will soon be 18 at some point within the next 6 to 7 years, right? But I'm telling you, that's I don't disagree with age gap, and I'm not shaming that aspect, but it is a little weird to try and date young women. And when you are in a position of power like he is, you shouldn't be doing those type of things anyway. Period.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
no, I absolutely agree. It's not that age isn't just a number. There's also lived experience, and I'm sorry, if you're my age, I'm 32. If you're my age and you're pursuing a woman who's in her early 20s, so we're gonna say under 23. One, that's fucking gross. Two, there's a reason why you're going for women that young, and it's because any woman who's older than that will recognize your bullshit and be able to call you on it, and you don't like that. So you're a predator, simply put.
Yep. The name of the associate, and again, this is an article that came out. I'll be honest, I didn't know about it. Otherwise, we actually would have covered it. But Joel Greenberg was indicted last summer on sex trafficking of children and financially supporting people in exchange for sex. One who was at least an underage girl, right? Same thing this guy's being accused of, except for technically he has not been accused of sex trafficking yet. But he did a bizarre interview today, and this is what I wanted to cover. We just watched some of the Jordan Peterson stuff, and that guy's crazy. This dude went on Tucker Carlson, and it's even more insane because essentially he's denying everything, but then saying things that haven't even been released in the media, right?
Wow.
So he's claiming now this is an elaborate scheme, involving false allegations to extort money from him and his family to the tune of $25 million. He said that they went to the FBI, they've been wearing wires, and they've been cooperating because they believe that all of this is false. He's essentially denied having that relationship, right?
Yeah. My take on it is he's doubling back to try to cover as much ground because he didn't have a chance to come out in front and anchor in the public consciousness that this isn't true, like most conservatives will do. They'll just, to get away with something, they'll start accusing their opponents of doing that, and then the thing comes out what they did, because now it's already cemented in the public as psyche, I guess, that they didn't do that, and people will remember that, not the change in information. So I think he's just hoping to try to backtrack and cover his ground there, because he doth protest too much.
Yeah, and usually whether they're guilty or not, unless you're Trump, you just kind of
meet your next pillow.
You don't say anything. We're not watching that. You don't really say anything, but this guy here is just going nuts. And I wanted to play a little bit of the interview for you because I think it's kind of interesting. And buddy, if you want, just stop me and we'll stop the interview and go back and talk through anything you want.
Oh, hang on. Nope, I got liquor. We're good.
Oh. Yeah, I'm almost out of my liquor, but here we go. I mean, and yes, and we talked a couple of weeks ago about how Tucker Carlson essentially is a white supremacist, and here we are on the show bringing some jackass back on that I don't want to. Anyway.
There are very few details in major news outlets tonight about this story. We have no background on it all, and not even any very important questions. Instead, we've invited Congressman Gaetz on the show to respond to these stories and give us his view of them.
All right. This face right here, and I'm sorry, and maybe it's because I've been reading and watching too much comic book shit lately. This is the face of a villain right here.
Oh yeah, hands down.
Whether he's done any of these allegations is inconsequential. This is just like the face of a villain.
Oh, easily.
He just needs a little Trump pin right here. He's missing.
Congressman, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate it. So this is obviously a serious allegation. Tell us what the truth is from your perspective.
It is a horrible allegation, and it is a lie. The New York Times is running a story that I have traveled with a 17-year-old woman, and that is verifiably false. People can look at my travel records and see that that is not the case. What is happening is an extortion of me and my family involving a former Department of Justice official. On March 16th, my father got a text message demanding a meeting wherein a person demanded $25 million in exchange for making horrible sex trafficking allegations against me go away. Our family was so troubled by that, we went to the local FBI. And the FBI and the Department of Justice were so concerned about this attempted extortion of a member of Congress that they asked my dad to wear a wire, which he did with the former Department of Justice official. Tonight, I am demanding that the Department of Justice and the FBI release the audio recordings that were made under their supervision and at their direction, which will prove my innocence and that will show that these allegations aren't true. They're merely intended to try to bleed my family out of money. And this former Department of Justice official tomorrow was supposed to be contacted by my father so that specific instructions could be given regarding the wiring of $4.5 million as a down payment on this bribe. I don't think it's a coincidence that tonight, somehow, the New York Times is leaking this information, smearing me, and ruining the investigation that would likely result in one of the former colleagues of the current DOJ being brought to justice for trying to extort me and my family.
So a couple of obvious questions that come to mind, and again, just to restate, this just happened, don't have any other information beyond what we've already said and you have said. First of all, who is this Department of Justice former employee who's trying to extort the money from you, you say?
His name is David McGee. He was a top official in the leadership in the Northern District of Florida as a prosecutor. He currently works at the Beggs and Lane law firm. As a
So he's naming a guy right?
Yeah.
He's naming somebody specific. He's naming the article did not release that information, by the way.
Yeah.
We just looked at the article. That guy's name's not in there.
Matter of fact, one of the recordings that was made at the FBI and Department of Justice request occurred at that law firm, and the money that was supposed to be paid today that would have shown even more evidence of David McGee's work in this extortion scheme, that was foiled by the New York Times story, and I believe that's why this horrible information and these terrible allegations have been used this evening.
So you're...
All right. Keith. So they're being extorted for money. The New York Times is outing the extortion for money, and he thinks that it's a conspiracy against him.
Yeah.
Now, I fail, and I'll be honest, I fail to understand how this is an extortion again. The extortionists want the money. If the New York Times releases this information about him, the extortion, he no longer has to pay extortionists. Aren't they on his side to some extent? I mean, at minimum, they're at least doing him a favor to not have to pay the money.
He's so stupid. Honestly, this is ridiculous. He's trying so hard to be authoritative and somewhat intimidating, and I can't. I'm sorry, I can't take him seriously. It's like I said, he looks like he was one of the Buffy the Vampire Slayer rejects.
Oh my God.
And I'll get to the investigation in a sec, but you're saying that David McGee was motivated by greed. He was trying to extort money from your family. That's his motivation, you're saying?
I know that there was a demand for money in exchange for a commitment that he could make this investigation go away along with his co-conspirators. They even claimed to have specific connections inside the Biden White House. Now, I don't know if that's true. They were promising that Joe Biden would pardon me. Obviously, I don't need a pardon. I'm not seeking a pardon. I have not done anything improper or wrong. But what I am troubled by is the real motivation for all of this. Just tonight, Ted Lieu, a Democrat, is calling on me to be removed from the House Judiciary Committee. And I believe we are in an era of our politics now, Tucker, where people are smearing.
I'm a little YouTube ads, the bane of my existence. That's okay. There's nothing you can do about it. Do you have your speed set differently, other than at the regular one times? Because their voices are deeper.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. So it's done on purpose so that YouTube won't take it off there.
Oh.
This is tonight's broadcast.
Okay. I thought this might have been from actually Fox itself, but okay.
This
that
is
makes
live
sense.
shit, bro. That's what this is.
Damn.
Conversation. I'm not the only person on screen right now who's been falsely accused of a terrible sex.
All right. So hold on a second. So two things. One, I like that you noticed that the voices were different because I like that his voice sounds distorted like that because it reminds me of those color shows, those meth and drug shows that you could watch. And, they're always and I'm going. I took 200 pounds of cocaine and I shoved it up in a crocodile's ass and we took it across the Atlantic. That type of shit. You always had those disguised voices. I always found those hilarious because it's somebody knows who you are and they don't work for the government and they could just easily be bought to sell your ass out. I don't know what the fuck you're thinking here. But
yeah,
I like that. But in a second, you know what he's going to do? He's going to compare himself to Tucker Carlson.
Act. You were accused of something that you did not do, and so you know what this feels like. You know the pain it can bring to your family, and you know how it just puts people on defense when you're accused of something so salacious and awful, but it did not happen. It is not true. And the fact that it is the basis of this attempt to extort my family tells a lot. And if the FBI and Department of Justice will release the tapes that they are in possession of, the American people will see what is really going on.
You just referred to a mentally ill viewer who accused me of a sex crime 20 years ago. And of course, it was not true. I never met the person. But I do agree with you that being accused falsely is one of the worst things that can happen.
He doesn't know how to get out of it.
Yeah.
He's being accused of 17-year-old underage rape. And I don't believe Tucker Carlson was accused of underage rape. I could be wrong because I've never heard that in my life. I never knew Tucker Carlson was ever accused of anything.
Yeah.
He's like, he doesn't know how to distance himself. That's the most hilarious part about this. He doesn't know how to distance himself from that.
A lot. Let's go back to the investigation. You say that it was or is underway. There was an investigation. What is the basis of that investigation? What is the allegation? That's really not very clear from these news stories.
Yeah, again, I only know what I've read in the New York Times. I can say that actually
he only knows what he read in the New York Times. He doesn't know anything else about this investigation, but he's been providing information to them with his father. And he needs the tapes released.
What the hell?
You and I went to dinner about 2 years ago. Your wife was there, and I.
Sorry.
What?
That's crazy, right?
Insanely. It's just so far out there.
Brought a friend of mine. You'll remember her, and she was actually threatened by the FBI, told that if she wouldn't cop to the fact that somehow I was involved in some pay-for-play scheme, that she could face trouble. And so I do believe that there are people at the Department of Justice who are trying to smear me, providing for flights and hotel rooms for people that you're dating who are of legal age is not a crime. And I'm just troubled that the lack of any sort of legitimate investigation into me would then convert into this extortion attempt.
I don't remember the woman you're speaking of or the context at all, honestly. But I would like to know who. So they're saying there is a 17-year-old girl who you had a relationship with. Is that true? And who are they? Who is this girl? What are they talking about at the New York Times?
The person doesn't exist. I have not had a relationship with a 17-year-old. That is totally false. The allegation, as I read it in the New York Times, is that I've traveled with some 17-year-old in some relationship. That is false, and records will bear that out to be false.
How long has this investigation been going on? Do you know?
I don't know.
When were you first informed of it?
Again, I really saw this as a deeply troubling challenge for my family on March 16th, when people were, talking about a minor and that there were pictures of me with child prostitutes. That's obviously false. There will be no such pictures because no such thing happened.
That was in the
but
article.
really on March 16th was when this got going from the extortion standpoint.
So what happens next? I mean, you've considered there is this investigation, I guess a criminal investigation. I'm not quite sure where the sex trafficking part comes in. I don't, again, for the fifth time, I don't really understand the story very well. But where does it go from here? I mean, you've made an allegation against someone by name on the air and accused him of trying to extort millions of dollars from your family. What happens tomorrow?
Well, what was supposed to happen was the transfer of this money that would have implicated the former colleague of these current DOJ officials. But that's obviously not going to happen tomorrow because the New York Times story was leaked in order to quell that investigative effort. So here's what needs to happen next. The FBI and the Department of Justice must release the tapes that are in their possession that were done at their direction. Those tapes will show that I am innocent and that the whole concept of sex charges against me was really just a way to try to bleed my family out of money and probably smear my name because I am a well-known, outspoken conservative, and I guess that's out of style in a lot of parts of the country right now.
Matt Gaetz, I appreciate your coming on tonight.
Thanks for giving me the chance to tell the truth, Tucker. I appreciate it.
It's a more interesting and complicated story than I knew from reading about. Thank you very much.
I'll just wait. They cut to commercial.
So we have just been informed that we may have something called a vaccine passport. Get one and you can live your life sort of normally. If you don't, you can't. What is this exactly? Should we be worried about it? Glenn Greenwald, for instance. If you just saw our Matt Gaetz interview, that was one of the weirdest interviews I've ever conducted. The story just appeared in the news a couple of hours ago. And on the certainty that there's always more than you read in the newspaper, we immediately called Matt Gaetz and asked him to come on and tell us more, which, as you saw, he did. I don't think that clarified much, but it certainly showed this is a deeply interesting story, and we'll be following it.
Okay, after all of that, I can't help but think that Matt Gaetz may have just fucked himself completely.
Oh yeah, like yes.
Like if Tucker Carlson is just like, I don't know how to handle this because there's this article and you're giving us information that's not in the article, which makes us think that you will know a lot more than you're denying, and you should probably just shut the hell up. But I have a show to run and I can't look like I'm trying to help you out here. But seriously, dude, start helping yourself out. Like, Carlson was so uncomfortable.
He was, and I don't know, like, I don't know, man. It was just something my buddy brought to my attention, and I was like, holy shit, I didn't know this article came out. And then all of a sudden I read it, and then I was like, oh shit, I found the actual interview. All right, we're gonna cover it because that's crazy to me, right?
Unbelievable, just unbelievable. I can't imagine what went through his head as he just kept letting words fall out of his face like that. Like he's almost incriminating himself. So this is going to be interesting to see how that goes. But it's interesting trying to see him how to do the whole distance himself from the accusations thing. But it's too late. And instead of being on the offensive, he's just reacting, and that's the Republicans know that's a losing game. That if you're trying to defend yourself, you're losing.
Yeah, it seems crazy to me, man. Seems crazy to me. Well, for the last segment, and we won't take too long for this before we get to our quick saves, but I wanted to. We talked before years and years ago about doing book reviews and different things like that, and I read a lot of books, honestly, or audiobooks. So I don't read them physically, but I listen to a lot of audiobooks, right? And what I wanted to do is just kind of, over the course of the next month, I'm going to give a little bit every other week about the book I'm reading. So currently, the book that I'm reading right now is by Ibram Kennedy, X-Kennedy. And he explains why he has an X in his middle name for a middle name compared to what it was before, but I'm not going to give that secret away right now. Because it's very interesting what he writes in here. And essentially, this book talks about how to be an anti-racist, and it talks about how if we understand the concept of anti-racism, we can re-energize and reshape the conversation about radical justice in America, more fundamentally pointing us towards liberating new ways of thinking about ourselves and each other. He asks some hard questions and has some hard discussions. So I'm probably about halfway through the book. So we'll cover real quickly the first quarter of it. And then because I don't want to give too much away. I want to give you a taste because the book itself actually is really good. And it's extremely story driven, right? So the author is also the guy that reads the book himself. And he is essentially, he's like a professor that has now started to write books. And he's been interested in racism and anti-racism since he's been 6 years old, he said in the book. So now, and this is the privilege right here, speaking, because if you think about it, at 6 years old, I was not thinking about racism. I'll be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And to think about somebody growing up and feeling like they have to do that just seems crazy to me, right?
Right.
And that's kind of one of those things where it makes you rethink your role, where you came from, how you grew up, and all those other things compared to other people. And it makes you appreciate what people have to go through that you never had to. So in the first chapter of the book, essentially what he talks about is racism essentially becomes internalized, and people essentially believe that it is that it is black on black violence, but in reality, black on black violence is an internalized concept. It's a scapegoat, essentially, is what he's saying, right? And he says there's only two states that you can be in. You can be racist or anti-racist. And he talks a lot about people that want to be in the middle, right? And that's and I'll call people out on the left. A lot of leftists say this. Well, I'm not racist. Well, you can't be not racist.
Yep.
Because the opposite of racist is not racist. It's anti-racist. It's the same thing with you can't be all lives matter, right? You are for black lives. You say it specifically. You are for Hispanic lives, that type of a thing. You're for Asian lives. You're for, Puerto Rican lives. And we could keep going, because when you try to include everything, what you're doing is you're taking and boiling it all down to be able to avoid the real discussion. So to be not racist, you might as well just say you're anti-racist. And he goes on to say the opposite of racism, right, is anti-racism. Anti-racism endorses racial equality. It locates the roots of the problem in power and policy, and it confronts racial inequality. The other thing he talks about at the beginning of the book is, people use racist as a pejorative slur, but it's not, right? He says people don't like being called racist because they claim it's a slur. Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson.
Racist Uncle Tucker.
Yeah. Will tell you that. On that show, I guarantee you once a night he'll say something about not being racist. How can he be racist? How can white people be racist if you don't support this, and this? He will say that. Yeah. What he's missing is that white people in power, have used that definition and try to create a slur out of it so that way it can't be used against allies or people that are not racist all the time. And he goes on to explain, racism and anti-racism are two similar states. And this is where, this is genius. I never thought of it this way before, but what he talked about is you can be racist and anti-racist, right? So at one moment, you can say a racist thing or commit a racist action, and the next minute be supporting anti-racism. But the idea is that we don't, and he's kind of saying you do not need to label somebody a racist for the rest of their life. What you do is you call out all the actions that they do that are racist, right? So Trump has more racist tendencies and more racist policies and more racist statements and more racist actions than he does anti-racist actions, right? So, yes, did he do some things that fit into that anti-racist category? Sure. But what does he do more of? Does that make him ultimately the end-all be-all racist? No. The majority of the shit he is and does and says is racist. So racist definition essentially is racist power has commandeered racial discrimination. Racist treating other or considering or making a distinction against or for an individual based on their race. Discrimination will create either inequity or equity, right? So either you're creating equity or inequity. It is racist if the racial discrimination is creating inequity by allowing an overrepresented group to receive power and wealth. Well, it is anti-racist if the racial discrimination is creating an equity by helping an underrepresented group to receive power or wealth. Think about that. That's what I re-listened to that 3 minutes of audio text like 3 times. Because what he's telling us is that to be racist and racial discrimination in and of itself is not racist. It's how you use it. So when people want to talk about when we have these movements in America, and my father, used to preach this as a kid. He didn't, when I was a kid, not when he was a kid. He probably didn't think about this shit when he was a kid, but he couldn't stand when Bill Clinton and all these other people were supporting colleges giving special priority to underprivileged minority groups. He said, my father claimed that is racist. They shouldn't do that. By this definition and this understanding, it is not racist because they are using a power to help give back wealth and power to minority groups rather than allowing it to stay in the white privileged community.
That's makes sense.
So there you go. That's my book report. I like I said, I've got through about a third of the book. I will update, as I keep going through it. I actually heavily recommend this book, and I'll tell you what, if you are the first person to reach out to me, I will actually send you my Audible book when I'm done, if you want. It's free if you've never received an Audible book before, and I'll happily gift it to you. It's all yours.
Oh, I used to have an Audible account.
There you go.
But it sounds worthwhile, honestly. At the end of the day, it sounds more than worthwhile.
Yeah, and if you don't want the audiobook and you want to read it, great, go ahead. The best is I can do my work when I don't have meetings, and it just plays right here on one monitor while, on the other monitor I'm working. And I can make my notes, do all my stuff that I want for it. And I think the best way, especially with this type of a book, is to write down your thoughts, your feelings, because I will tell you that this book does provoke you to rethink how you see racism in America.
Which is very, especially as like a white person, that's very important, is to rethink the way you approach racism. And the one thing that I really liked was the comment on, the opposite of racist isn't not racist. The opposite of racist is anti-racist, right? And 110%, I am completely behind you on this one, simply for the fact that, or behind that idea, because it makes sense. I mean, racism is a thing that exists, and simply not being that thing is not the same as being against that thing or negating the thing. Matter, antimatter negate each other out. Racist, anti-racist. It makes sense that, to truly fight racism isn't to just pretend racism doesn't exist, like so many people like to do, especially when their privilege might be in jeopardy. To not be racist, or to be against racism, is the only way to get rid of racism.
Yep.
So, wow, I think I may have just doubled back and redundantly commented there. Huh. Oh, my brain is starting to eat itself.
There you go. That's what happens when you drink rum instead of scotch this week.
Tell me about it.
It's your fault.
I don't get paid until for a couple more days, so I haven't been able to buy more scotch.
There you go. So, we're gonna round the show out real quick with our quick save. So this week, Buddy's quick save.
Oh God, I included this. I wanted to talk about this last week, but we of course didn't really have the chance to. And since we didn't do quick saves last week, I got bumped to this week. So in Alberta, our conservative government has a pet project, which is a waste of $30 million a year, known as the Canadian Energy Centre, or the Energy War Room. They've wasted millions of dollars and had nothing but scandal and done nothing. Literally, just they have not done a damn thing except waste $30 million and then hide what they've done with the money and refuse to provide a report, even though it's public money. But, when you're a conservative, you can do that. Well, recently, they really got pissed off about the Bigfoot movie that's appearing, or that's on Netflix, because of its anti-oil message. So the snowflakes who are upset about a Bigfoot movie that, a kid's movie that is a commentary about, or provides an aside mark. It's just an aside remark. It's not even the entire movie is about the oil industry. It's just an aside. It's a one sentence throwaway. And because my government is so entrenched in oil and gas, and it cannot wait to send its tongue back up oil and gas's ass. They got pissed off and are trying to defend it to endear it into coming back, kind of like Jim Carrey being anti-vax just to try to get Jenny McCarthy to come back. She won't. And it's so funny that my province is basically one of the redneck capital of Canada, the southern United States of Canada. And, they're all, we're so tough and we're so strong, but oh my God, there's a kid's movie that says something I don't like. I'm going to rally against it and rabble. And actually, it's also come out that the producers behind the movie have said, well, your opposition to this movie is silly, but thank you for the attention. You've really boosted the number of people who've watched us.
Yeah.
So it's the dumbest thing in the last couple of weeks anyways, or it's most absurd. I can't say dumbest because they just released their announcement for their curriculum and it's stupid. This is the most absurd thing, most ridiculous thing.
That's better because you know there's going to be more that comes out.
Always. Yeah, just wait 5 minutes. So yeah, check out the Bigfoot movie on Netflix because it's all anti-oil and it'll piss off a conservative.
I just feel like streaming it nonstop on Netflix to
right?
get them views, for it.
Right.
So my quick save is also very Canadian related. So there's a band called the Acacia Strain out of New Jersey, and they're probably one of my favorite deathcore bands ever. And I have seen them live almost as many times as I've seen Nine Inch Nails live, weirdly enough. And I seen them back in the day when they were like very small before their album release type thing. Well, they had they had their newest album released, and it had this vocalist named Jess that I'd never heard of. And so I Googled and found this band called Mortality Ray. And I will tell you, Keith, they claim to be a hardcore punk band, but it is definitely not straight up punk music. I can't play very much because I don't want to get I don't want to get DMCA'd.
Yes.
I don't know. So this is my new favorite band, and I really like this album. And then what it did is it actually led me to all these other artists. And the reason I say it's Canadian related is because they're from Alberta, Calgary.
Yay!
Which I did not know this, but Alberta must have a pretty thriving hardcore scene there. Because there's like 3 or 4 other bands that I'd never heard of that are from there that I just started checking out.
See, and that's so interesting because one of my biggest complaints about the metal scene is the fact that we can't get good shows here. We just, ever since we lost, we had what was called Race City, and that was the only venue Calgary had that was big enough to host, what the hell is it called? The hell was that big punk music festival every year that went on?
Riot Fest?
No, it was Warped Tour. There was the only venue in Calgary that could host Warped Tour, and we lost that venue, and now nothing. So we cannot get a good metal show here anymore, and it pisses me off because I'll always see these damn Canadian tours, and I'll look and it'll say like Montreal, Toronto. And that's it for their Canadian tour. Or they might go to Vancouver. What really pisses me off is when they go to goddamn Saskatoon, because there's like 13 people that live there. And they get more metal shows than we do in Calgary. And that's bullshit.
And that's fair. That's crazy. That's just crazy to think about. But see, like, this band is just, it's hard. This is very heavy, very aggressive. and all of her lyrics are angry and very challenging of the administration. We'll just put it that way.
I like it. I like it a lot.
So I think it's something that you all should check out if you like death metal. I mean, if Hannah were here, we'd be doing like a full-on, review of it. But unfortunately, he's not today. But I know when he lists postpartum, he's gonna like the music choice. He'll hate the Tucker Carlson segment.
Oh God, will he ever?
He'll love the music choice at the end of the show. Oh, anyway. With that being said, I think we're going to wrap the show up. We've gone a little longer than I even expected we could. See?
Damn.
See? Look at that. Your Canadian segment this week, Keith, was spot on. If you didn't know who Jordan Peterson was and how much he's hated, you sure as fuck do now. So, anyway, thank you all so much for joining us this week. We'll be back next week with another episode of Cellar Door Skeptics. And who knows? Maybe we'll have more on the Matt Gaetz?
I don't even want to correct you anymore.
The Gaetz. We're gonna call him the Gaetz Mafia. We'll have more on the Matt Gaetz Mafia right here on Cellar Door Skeptic. Thank you all so much, and have an amazing night.